The house has been quiet since October. Not the kind of quiet that settles in after the kids go to bed, or the comfortable silence you share with someone you love. This is a different kind. The kind that has weight to it. I notice it most in the mornings when I sit at the kitchen table with my tea and look out at the backyard. The maple tree my late husband Douglas planted the year we moved in is still there. It's taller than the fence now. I don't know when that happened. My name is Margaret. I'm 67 years old. I live in a small house in Guelph, Ontario, and for most of my adult life, I believed that if you loved people hard enough and long enough, they would eventually understand what that love cost you. I don't believe that anymore. I want to tell you about my daughter's wedding, not because I'm still angry. I've moved past anger, though it took longer than I expected. I want to tell you because I think some of you might be sitting at your own kitchen tables, in your own quiet houses, and wondering if what you're feeling is normal. Wondering if you gave too much, wondering if it was always going to end this way. It was a Saturday in late June when my daughter Claire called to tell me the date had been set. I remember standing by the stove, stirring a pot of soup I was making for the week, and feeling my heart do something warm and involuntary at the sound of her voice. Claire was 34. She'd been with her partner, a man named Derek, for 3 years. I'd only met him 4 times. "We're doing it at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake," she told me. "Small ceremony. Intimate." I asked how many people. "About 80, she said. I didn't say anything to that. 80 people didn't feel particularly intimate to me, but I let it go. I was just glad she'd called. What she said next, I have replayed in my mind more times than I can count. "Mum, I need to talk to you about something." "About the day itself." She paused, and I turned the burner down on the soup. Derek's family they're a certain type, his mother especially, very put together, very image conscious, and I don't want anything to feel uncomfortable. I waited. "I think it might be better if you sat near the back, away from Derek's family. And maybe if you could find something to wear that's a bit more formal. I don't want you to stand out." I stood there in my kitchen for a moment. The soup was making a slow bubbling sound. The afternoon light was coming through the window at an angle and catching the dust on the counter. "You don't want me to stand out," I said. "I just want the day to go smoothly." I told her I understood. I told her I'd think about something to wear. I told her I was happy for her. After I hung up, I sat down at the kitchen table and I didn't move for a long time. I want to be honest with you about who I am because I think it matters for understanding what happened next. I am not a flashy woman. I never have been. I worked for 31 years as an administrative coordinator at a regional health authority here in Ontario. Sensible job, steady pay. Douglas and I raised Claire and her older brother Nathan in a 3-bedroom house, and we took our vacations in a used minivan, and we packed lunches and clipped coupons, and we never once complained about it because that was just life. And life was good enough. Douglas passed 11 years ago. Heart attack, very sudden. Claire was 23. Nathan was 26. We were in the middle of helping Claire through her second year at Wilfrid Laurier. After Douglas died, I went back to work the following Monday because I didn't know what else to do with myself. I kept packing lunches out of habit, even though there was no one to pack them for. In the years after, I helped both of my children in ways I won't fully list here because it would take too long and I don't say any of it to create a ledger. But I will say this. I helped Claire with her last year of tuition when her student loan fell short. I co-signed on her first apartment in Hamilton so she could pass the credit check. When she was between jobs for 7 months after a company restructuring, I transferred money into her account every 2 weeks without being asked. Never a large amount. Just enough so she didn't have to worry. I did these things because she was my daughter and I loved her. That's the only reason. What I didn't fully understand until I was standing at my kitchen stove, stirring soup and being asked to sit at the back of her wedding so as not to embarrass her, was that somewhere along the way, the help had stopped meaning anything to Claire. It had simply become part of the background, like wallpaper, like the maple tree in the yard. Just there. I did find something to wear. I bought a pale gray dress at a consignment shop on Wyndham Street. Very clean, very plain, nothing remarkable about it. I had my hair done at the salon where I've been going for 15 years. My friend Paulette, who lives 2 streets over and has known me since our children were in primary school together, came with me to get her hair done at the same time. Paulette had lost her own husband 3 years ago, and her daughter lived in Vancouver and called on birthdays. We had a lot in common, Paulette and I, though we never said so directly. "You look lovely," Paulette told me, looking at me in the mirror. I thanked her. "Are you nervous?" I thought about that. "I don't think nervous is the right word," I said. "I feel like someone who's been invited to a party they weren't supposed to be invited to." Paulette looked at me for a moment in that way she has, where she sees more than you mean to show. She didn't say anything. She just reached over and squeezed my hand. The drive to Niagara-on-the-Lake took just under 2 hours. I left early. I listened to the radio and watched the flat farmland open up on either side of the highway and tried to hold on to the part of myself that was genuinely, honestly happy that my daughter was getting married. That part existed. It was real. It was just crowded out by some other feeling I didn't have a clean word for. The vineyard was beautiful. I'll give Derek's family that much. The ceremony was set up on a slope overlooking the rows of vines, white chairs arranged in a wide arc, a breeze coming off the lake. I parked and walked the gravel paths to the seating area, and found myself a chair near the far left side, close to the end of a row, just as I'd been asked. There was nobody near me. The front rows were already filling up with people I didn't recognize. Well-dressed, confident, the kind of easy comfort that comes from never having had to worry too much about money. I sat with my hands in my lap and watched them. Claire looked beautiful. I want you to know that first. When she came down the aisle in a cream dress with her hair pinned up, I felt something crack open in my chest in the best possible way, because whatever else was true, she was still my daughter, and I had been there the morning she was born, and I had held her when she was small enough to hold in both arms. That doesn't disappear, no matter what else happens, that doesn't disappear. But she didn't look for me. She walked past all those rows of guests and her eyes moved across the faces. Derek's family, her friends from work, people from what her life had become, and she didn't look toward the back left corner where her mother was sitting. I watched the whole ceremony from that spot. I clapped when they were announced as married. I smiled when people around me looked over during the applause. Nobody asked who I was. At the reception, I found a seat at a table near the door to the kitchen, one of those tables that gets placed slightly apart from the main configuration, the kind where they put guests they weren't quite sure what to do with. I was seated next to an older gentleman who turned out to be Derek's great-uncle from Sudbury. He was 91, had poor hearing, and spent most of the meal telling me about a fishing trip he'd taken in 1987. I listened carefully and asked him questions, and he seemed very pleased by this. I did not give a speech. I had not been asked to give one. Claire came to my table once during the dinner. She leaned down briefly, kissed me on the cheek, said, "Glad you made it, Mum." Her eyes were already moving toward the next person she needed to speak to before she'd finished the sentence. I ate my salmon and listened to Derek's great-uncle and drove home in the dark. It was on the drive home that something shifted in me. I can't point to a single moment. It was more like a slow settling, like sediment dropping through water. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was just very, very clear. I had driven 2 hours to sit in the back corner of my daughter's wedding and be kissed on the cheek like a distant acquaintance, and I had paid for the dress and for the hair, and I had given Claire an envelope with $3,000 in it as a wedding gift, because that was what I thought a mother gave. I had transferred that money from the small savings account I kept for emergencies, the same account I had been carefully rebuilding since I retired 2 years ago on a combination of CPP, OAS, and my workplace pension. $3,000. For the privilege of sitting near the kitchen. By the time I crossed back over into Wellington County, I had made a decision. I want to be clear that what I did next was not out of spite. I've thought about this many times since, tried to be honest with myself about my own motives. And I genuinely believe that what I felt driving home that night was not revenge. It was something quieter than that. It was the first time in a very long time that I had thought about myself first. The Monday after the wedding, I called my financial advisor at my bank branch on Stone Road. Her name is Anita, and she has been managing my account since I retired. I told her I wanted to review some things. We sat down the following Thursday. I explained what I was thinking. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. What I want, I told her, is to make sure that what I have goes where I actually want it to go. I had made a will some years ago after Douglas died, in which I had left everything equally to Claire and Nathan. Nathan lived in Saskatoon with his wife and their 2 children. He called me every Sunday morning. He'd called me from the parking lot of the grocery store the morning of Claire's wedding just to check in, knowing I was driving alone and might be nervous. That was Nathan. I called a lawyer the following week. Her office was downtown near the courthouse. She was around my age, efficient and kind, with a plant on her windowsill that looked like it had been there for 20 years. I updated my will. The changes I made were significant. I also updated the beneficiary designation on my RRSP and my TFSA, which the lawyer noted were sometimes overlooked and very important to have in order. The lawyer asked me gently whether I had considered a capacity assessment, given that changes like these could sometimes be contested. I told her I had just driven 2 hours to sit in the back corner of my daughter's wedding and was sound of mind enough to know what I wanted to do about it. She smiled at that. I'll note your decision-making capacity was clear and well articulated, she said, and wrote something down. It was about 6 weeks after the wedding when Claire called me about money for the first time as a married woman. She and Derek were looking at a condo in Burlington. Prices were still high, rates had come down a little, but they were short on the down payment. She asked, in the careful, angled way she had learned to ask, whether I might be in a position to help with a gift. I thought about the chair near the kitchen door. I thought about the cheek kiss. I thought about $3,000 from my emergency savings. I'm not going to be able to do that, I said. A pause. Oh, another pause. Is everything okay? Everything is fine, I said. I'm just at a point in my life where I need to be more careful with what I have. I didn't realize things were tight, she said, and the way she said it suggested she was a little irritated rather than concerned. They're not tight, I said. I just have different priorities now. She didn't ask what the priorities were. That told me something. I want to tell you about what happened in the months after that, because I think this is the part that matters most, and the part that is hardest to explain without sounding like I became cold or bitter. Which is not what happened. What happened is that I started paying attention to myself. I had a physiotherapy referral I'd been putting off for a knee that had been bothering me for 2 years. I booked the appointment. I went every week for 6 weeks, and the knee improved significantly. I started walking in the mornings, down along the trail that runs by the Speed River. Sometimes Paulette came with me and sometimes I went alone, and both were good. I joined a ceramics class at the Guelph Arts Council on a Tuesday evening. I had not done anything creative since high school, and the first 2 classes I made things that looked like they had been produced by a child in distress. By the 4th class, I made a small bowl that was genuinely bowl-shaped, and I brought it home and put it on my kitchen counter and looked at it every morning while I had my tea. I went to visit Nathan and his family in Saskatoon in November. I stayed for 10 days. His children, who were 6 and 8, treated me with a warmth that I had not realized I had been missing. His youngest followed me around the house asking questions about everything she could see, and I answered every single one because I had all the time in the world. Nathan took me out to dinner one evening while his wife stayed home with the kids. We went to a small Italian place near their house, and we split a bottle of wine, and he looked at me across the table and said, "You seem different, Mum, in a good way." "I think I've been doing some reorganizing," I said. He nodded like he understood more than I'd said, which he probably did, because Nathan was always perceptive that way. I didn't tell him about the will. That wasn't the point. The point wasn't punishment. The point was honesty, about where love was being returned and where it was flowing only in one direction, slowly draining me like a tap left running. Claire reached out again in January. She and Derek had found a different place, smaller, that worked with their budget. She called to tell me about it, and we talked for about 20 minutes about the layout and the neighborhood and the walk score, and at the end she mentioned that Derek's mother had helped them with some of the moving costs. "That was nice of her," I said. "She's been very supportive," Claire said. There was something pointed in her tone, but it was pointed like a question, not an accusation. "Good," I said. "That's as it should be." Another silence. "Then, are you upset with me, Mum?" I had thought about this question before it came, because I knew it would come eventually. "I'm not upset," I said, which was true. "But I've been doing a lot of thinking since your wedding, about what I want the rest of my life to look like." What does that mean? It means I realized I spent a very long time taking care of things that were never really mine to take care of, I said. And I want to spend whatever time I have left taking care of the things that are. The silence on her end was longer this time. I didn't know you felt that way, she finally said. I know, I said. That's something I've had to think about too. We talked for a little while longer. The conversation was uncomfortable in the way that real conversations sometimes are, the kind where both people are present and no one is pretending. Claire said that she hadn't realized how much the seating arrangement at the wedding had affected me. I told her it wasn't just the seating. She was quiet for a while. Before we hung up, she said, "Can we have lunch sometime?" "Just the two of us?" I said yes. I meant it. It's spring now. The maple tree in the backyard has that new leaf look to it, the almost electric green that only lasts a few weeks before it deepens into summer. I have my tea in the mornings, and I look at it, and it doesn't feel like something I missed. It feels like something I'm watching in real time. Paulette and I are planning a trip to Cape Breton in July. We booked it 2 months ago, the first proper trip I've taken since before Douglas died. We found a small inn near the Cabot Trail, and we've already looked up walking routes. Neither of us has ever been. I had lunch with Claire in March. We went to a place on McConnell Street that she chose, a little cafe with good soup. We sat for almost 2 hours. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't resolved. I want to be honest with you about that. These things don't have clean endings, not in real life. But she listened, and I said things I had been holding for longer than I should have. And by the end, we were both a little raw, and both still there, which felt like something. She asked me once during that lunch whether I thought she had been selfish. I thought about the chair by the kitchen door. I thought about the cheek kiss and the envelope and the 31 years of administrative work and the soup I was stirring when she called and all the quiet mornings since. "I think you stopped seeing me," I said, "and I think I let you." She didn't argue with that. I don't know exactly where we go from here. I've learned at 67 to be a little suspicious of neat resolutions. Life doesn't tend to offer them. What it does offer, if you pay attention, is a kind of clarity that comes from deciding, however late, to stop living at the edge of other people's stories and start living at the center of your own. I sat in the back corner of my daughter's wedding in a consignment shop dress, and nobody asked my name. And something about that, as painful as it was the thing that finally showed me where I was standing and how long I had been standing there and how much further I could still walk if I chose to. I chose to. The tea is still warm, the maple tree is still green, and I am, for the first time in a long time, exactly where I want to be. I've thought a lot about what it means to love someone without keeping score. For most of my adult life, I believed that was the right way, the only way, really. You give, and you don't count it. And eventually the love comes back around in some form you recognize. What I understand now, after everything with Claire, is that there's a difference between giving freely and giving invisibly. I had confused the two for a very long time. Every transfer I made into her account, every co-signed form, every morning I went back to work when I would rather have stayed in bed grieving, none of it registered because I had made myself so easy to overlook. I had shrunk myself into the background so thoroughly that Claire stopped being able to see me as a person with a life of her own. I had become a function, useful when needed, easy to seat near the kitchen door when not. That is not something that happens all at once. It accumulates quietly over years, and the honest truth is that I allowed it. Not because I was weak, but because I genuinely loved her, and love has a way of making you patient with things that are slowly doing you harm. Patience is a virtue right up until the moment it becomes a habit of disappearing. When I sat in that back corner at the vineyard and watched my daughter walk past without looking for me, something became clear in a way it hadn't been before. Not anger, not bitterness, just clarity, the kind that comes when the gap between what you have accepted and what you actually deserve becomes impossible to ignore. What I did after, the appointments, the walks, the ceramics class, the trip to Saskatoon, none of that was dramatic. It wasn't a grand gesture or a declaration. It was just a series of small decisions to treat my own life as something worth investing in. And every one of those decisions produced something real. The knee improved. The mornings got easier. Nathan's youngest asked me 12 questions about the Speed River, and I knew every answer. Small things. Enormous things. The will I updated was not an act of punishment, it was an act of honesty. When you look clearly at where love is being returned and where it is only flowing outward, it becomes dishonest to keep pretending otherwise in every area of your life, including the practical ones. Claire and I had lunch in March, and it was hard and it was real, and we are still figuring out what we are to each other now. I think that figuring out is only possible because I stopped making it easy for us to avoid it. When I finally said the things I had been holding, she had no choice but to hear them. That is its own kind of gift, even if it doesn't feel like one in the moment. What I want to say to anyone who recognizes any part of this story is simply this: the clarity you are waiting for is not going to arrive on its own. It comes from one decision, then another, then another. It comes from a physiotherapy appointment you finally book, a chair you choose for yourself, a conversation you stop avoiding. It comes from the slow, unglamorous work of deciding that your life, the one you are living right now, not a future version, not the one your children come back into, is worth showing up for. I am 67 years old and I am walking along the Speed River in the mornings, and a bowl I made with my own hands is sitting on my kitchen counter, and I am going to Cape Breton in July. That is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything.